Alright, let's get this going. So, how's it going? I'm just a guy on the internet trying to explain some things to people. Today I'm going to cover on what my perception on what the gods are and how they work is. Also, I'll be talking about magic, as you can see here. Alright, so, let's start off. When we talk about the gods and magic and all of that, a lot of people are very skeptical. That's perfectly fine. The way it's been presented to you is deliberately misleading, because the reality of it is that there is magic and the gods do exist, and I can explain it to you in a way that isn't super mystical necessarily, and even the more atheistic minded individuals by the end of this might come around thinking, oh, okay, so they do exist. It doesn't mean you have to believe in them, doesn't mean you have to pray to them, doesn't mean you have to like them either, but there is truth in it, and I'll explain it now. Alright, so here we have our world, as you can see. This is the material world, the scientific world. This is data. This is things we can all observe. Reproducible results is what we're looking at here. Right? We could call this ordered, if we want, because there's a lot of rules in this world. There's material rules, facts, hard facts, reality. This is what we have to contend with on a regular basis. This is one hemisphere of human existence. Alright? This is the other hemisphere of human existence. This is chaos. Now, when I say chaos, I don't mean something negative. What I mean between these two is this is pattern, this is consistency, this is stagnation, this is change, this is alteration, this is security, and this is freedom. Neither of these is good or bad. These are just two sides of the same whole. Both are necessary. Both are good. There is no value distinction between the two. Now, when we talk about, magic, we know what science is, right? People go collect data, then they analyze that data, they put it through a series of rigors and tests, and then they peer review it, they send it to various of their colleagues to essentially try and poke holes in it. If they can't poke holes in it, then things are looking good for whatever that particular claim they're making is. But what is magic? Well, when we think about magic, we oftentimes think like Harry Potter or Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, and that seems completely fantastical and unrealistic, because it is. It's not our real world. That's not how magic in the real world works. How does magic in the real world work? Well, this is belief, is what this is. That's what magic is. Because magic exists inside the human mind. As the scientific world is comprised of material, right? Solid things that we can see and touch and taste and sense, thought is what comprises the other world. This is what's going on in our heads individually and collectively. And the ability to manipulate those beliefs, is magic. You understand? So, how does this play out in reality? Well, you, if you're listening to me, are very likely either inside of a building or nearby a building. That very real building, that very real concrete structure that was comprised with material in an orderly fashion, in a safe way, because, we've had data peer review on how to correctly construct a building. All of that only exists because at one point it was just an idea in somebody's head. This is the interplay between the two. We are perceiving and thinking and seeing. We see the material world. That affects us. We have an idea, a thought. We share that thought with others. We believe in that thought, that idea. We act on it, and then we change the material world, which then goes back and forth. I think some people call this dialectic materialism. The interplay between the way that we believe and the way that we act, essentially, that affects the real world. Now, if you can manipulate people's beliefs, then you are doing magic. You are performing magic. So when I refer to magic, when I refer to the gods, know that that is what I'm referring to. Now, we should have a pretty firm grasp on what magic is by this definition. What are some examples? Well, a good example of science versus magic would be, let's say, for example, there's a woman who's dating a guy and he's a piece of shit. And he's a garbage dude, and you could even prove that scientifically if you wanted to. He is bad, not good for her, doesn't treat her right. All of her family tell her that, all of her friends tell her that, everyone who cares about her tells her he's no good for you, but she's in love with him. She stays with him. She even goes to a therapist, a person whose job it is to study the human mind in a scientific way. Did I spell science wrong? Jesus Christ. Anyway. I'm an idiot. A person whose job it is to study the human mind in a scientific way. And they can explain to her, and they can break it down for her very clearly, very concisely, in data approaching ways that should convince her to leave this guy, that he's not good for her. However, there's a good chance that it either won't happen, or it'll take a very, very long time to parse through all of why she is staying with this guy who's not treating her well. An alternative method would be potentially, let's say, this girl's mother goes to a tarot reader. And then she tells the tarot reader all what she's worried about, because that's what you do at a tarot reading, you chit-chat. And the tarot reader tells the mom, send your daughter to me. And effectively, the daughter, who happens to be something of a spiritual person maybe, let's say, the tarot reader gives her a reading. Because with tarot, you're not actually reading the cards. The cards are just a distraction. It's the misdirection that's required for magic to exist, right? The misdirection is how you achieve magic. It's because we have a logical part to our brain, but if you can get that logical part to look elsewhere, not where it should be looking, then you can perform magic. Right? This exists where this does not. The unknown, the known. The unseen, the seen. So, the tarot cards act as a misdirection, and that misdirection will ultimately allow this tarot reader to convince her that the universe is speaking through these cards, and that the universe is telling her to dump this guy. And there's a good chance that she will do what the tarot reader said based on a spiritual belief in the universe, horoscopes or whatever. Now you can view that all as nonsense and silliness, and fair enough, you can do that. And, to some extent, you're right, it is. It's all in our heads. However, because she believes in it, and because she happened to believe in someone who did want her best interests at heart, she's going to make a real material change to her life that could not be achieved through the scientific way, or it would have taken much, much longer. That's not universally the case, but it can happen, and that's the power of magic. The placebo effect, another example of magic. It's you're believing that you are getting the medicine you need, you're believing that you are being healed, and thus your body actually reacts as though you are. Alright, so talk about healing through magic. It's healing through the world of belief. And oftentimes this comes in a more social form of healing. Also, art is a big part of this one, because art is one of the major ways you shift people's perception. It's one of the tools of magic. And you can perform healing arts, but you can also do dark magic. And what is dark magic? Well, take for example the Aztecs. One might take that as an example, where some rituals they would involve, not all rituals, right? Not all of it is, but there were rituals of human sacrifice. And now you might think, well, how does human sacrifice do anything? How are you not just butchering a random person, for the sake of it? Well, it's affecting people, right? The way that human sacrifice and other black magic works is through trauma. You are traumatizing somebody, and you are using that trauma to create a real-world material change that you think is useful. In the case of blood sacrifice, think of it this way. Let's imagine you and your friend are walking down the street. And you like this friend. They're a close friend with you, but you're close with lots of people, right? There's nothing necessarily special about this particular friend in terms of your relationship to them or their relationship to you. And then all of a sudden, you come across a particularly horrible, grisly scene. Nasty murder. Maybe it even happened in front of you. Maybe you're not just looking at the corpse, but you actually see the person get killed. Really terrible, terrible stuff. And that changes you. You've now seen that. You can't unsee that. That's going to affect you somehow. And it's also going to affect your friend. And now, you two share a bond that you and your other friends don't share. Now, you and that friend have something special. Right? Maybe you don't even tell other people that you see it, which creates a secret bond that you have with this person. Right? Now, for better or worse, you are now, in a way, closer to this person. Right? Because you saw this awful thing. Because you were part of this awful thing. And when you look at Aztec rituals of blood sacrifice that were done in the public square for everyone to watch, oftentimes to participate in through the act of bloodletting, they would cut their arms to bleed while the blood sacrifice was happening. You create a sense of community bonding over a traumatic, horrible experience. And one might look at that and say, well, that's just objectively bad. But what if I told you that's one of the ways they kept their society from killing so many people? Because in Aztec culture, from what I'm led to believe, it was considered a sin to kill in war. It was not, or it was just not okay to kill in war. It was taboo. Which means that they killed fewer people in war. If the death toll is less because you did this blood sacrifice, if you have to blood sacrifice one person, and that sates people's bloodlust so that they don't have the desire to kill 1,000, is that a bad thing? It's fucked up. It's really fucked up. But if you can potentially avoid a war just by sacrificing one person, is that magic worth performing? And this is why we question. This world has certain questions they don't seem very keen on getting to. You know, the world of order oftentimes views the world of chaos as an innately negative thing, that chaos needs to be staved off, that it's a bad thing. But more chaotically minded people don't see order as an innately negative thing. It's just, they know it's temporary. There's this interplay between this. A state of disorder and a state of order. A state of chaos and a state of dischaos. Right? Pattern, lack of pattern. Both are part of the world. They're just both part of our existence. And to try and separate one from the other is like trying to separate one half of a coin from the other. They're part of the same thing. So, that is ultimately what magic is. And then if we're going over the gods, gods are a use of personification, which is the tool of when you take something and you make it human-like. You give it human traits and qualities, usually so that people can relate to it more, oftentimes. Not always. So when we talk about the gods, they represent ideas about how people do behave, ought to behave, will behave. They offer commentary on natural phenomena and the associations people make with those natural phenomena, like having an all-father who can throw lightning bolts. It's like power. You feel that power, that fear of something much more powerful above you when you're talking to your father when you're a kid. You associate those feelings with each other. That's a human projection onto a natural phenomena, and we make an association through personification of a deity. We create a god, and oftentimes that's why gods will have multiple different things about them that at first glance you ask, well, why are you the god of these things? Is it just random? No, it's because those things have something in common, and together they form this broader picture of something. For example, there was a goddess named Epona, and she was a Celtic goddess. She was a Celtic goddess of freedom, sovereignty. This one's important. This is her main attribute. War, horses, trade, and beauty. Now, at first, you might look at these and think, well, these aren't necessarily all super related. How does this... Why is she the goddess of all these things when she could just... Why horses? Why not dogs? Why trade? Why not artistry? Why war? Why not dance? Right? Why is it these things? Because Epona as a goddess is a representation of primarily sovereignty. from a like social perspective. One might even say kind of a national or a tribal perspective. You're part of a group, and that group wants to maintain its sovereignty. What is sovereignty? Well, to some extent, sovereignty is your ability to go about your business unmolested. Within your sphere of influence, you can do what you want to do. It's kind of like power, but it's more about the freedom that comes with being able to do what you want to do and not being inhibited by others, rather than your ability to perform tasks against others' will if you need to, which is more about what power is. If I want something and you don't want something, but I get what I want and you don't get what you want, I'm the one who has power. Sovereignty is more about just, I get what I want, and it's not so much about inhibiting your ability to or competing with you necessarily. Well, how do you maintain sovereignty? Well, freedom is a critical part of that. Being able to keep freedoms for people individually, but also just the idea of freedom of movement as it relates to sovereignty, doing what you need to do. Right? You have to maintain that. You can't do much with a shackled wrist, so your freedom is important. How do you maintain your freedom? Well, war is one of the ways you maintain freedom and sovereignty. Sometimes people might enter your territory, your hemisphere, and want to start a scrap. And you can either roll over and thus lose your sovereignty, or you can fight them. So you're going to have to fight. So she is a goddess of war. Horses, actually we'll get to these in a second, because these kind of tie everything together. Trade and sovereignty. Well, being economically liquid is important with sovereignty. Yeah, you can be an individual isolated power, but oftentimes you can be limited in your ability to do things based on what others are doing outside of just invading you. Maybe, you produce a certain good and somebody else is also producing that good. Well, you're going to have to compete with them. You're going to have to be, a good trader. You're going to have to be a good merchant. You're going to have to know where the markets are, where you're going to get the best bang for your buck, what's the most effective or efficient travel relative to the amount of pay that you'll receive, or the amount of, what will be the term for trading? I guess we'll go with pay. The amount of pay you'll receive for performing your trades. How much benefit will this benefit you personally? How much will this benefit your group? Are you bringing in valuable goods or just more shit that they've already got? So trade is important in order to maintain your sovereignty. Beauty, sovereignty, freedom is a beautiful thing. That's what we're fighting for. So she is represented as a very beautiful young girl. Oftentimes riding into the sunset on a horse. Now, why horses? Well, horses are critical for maintaining a broader sense of sovereignty. If you have a kingdom and it's a certain space, well, you have to be able to move troops or move people relatively quickly between that space. If all you have is your own 2 feet, well, that's going to limit the size and the scope of what you can maintain sovereignty over. However, if you can use horses, you can cover a much greater distance in a much shorter time. That increases the reach of your potential, of your domain, over which you can maintain sovereignty, either as a group or as an individual. Horses also provide an advantage in terms of freedom. You can do things with horses that you just can't do on 2 feet. That's just the case. Greater amounts of what you can do, that increases freedoms or opportunities, which can then be maximized by being free to pursue those opportunities that are presented by being able to have a horse. War, huge advantage having a horse. Huge advantage in war having a horse. The code of chivalry literally means being a horseman, recognizing that horsemen just have an innate advantage over guys on the ground. Height being a big one of them, speed being a big one of them. Not getting tired because you're going from point A to point B is a big one of them, because after your horse is tired, you can still get off your horse and walk. So horses in war, huge advantage. Horses in trade, also huge advantage. If you have to walk on foot, that's going to limit the amount of trade partners that you have. But if you have horses or other beasts of burden maybe, but probably horses, you can cover a greater distance, reach farther markets, and improve your margins on your trades. And then beauty is, well, everything here is beautiful as far as this is not beautiful. War is not beautiful. Being able to defend yourself, that's beautiful. But I wouldn't call war beautiful. But it's meant to represent something that you are pursuing. You are pursuing sovereignty. It's something a person ought to pursue, hence why beauty is associated with her. So, understanding that when you piece all these things together, these concepts, individually they're not the same thing, but when you put them together, you see that there's a link between all of these things, and that link is what is trying to be expressed with the personified image of Epona, the goddess. So that is one god of many. And there are many other gods, and these gods are powered by belief. Just like I described earlier with the house, if every building that you've ever been in, that you've ever seen, was once nothing more than an idea in someone's head, so too are the gods. If I have an imaginary friend, and I think that this imaginary friend really likes when I leave snacks outside, for example, and I think that, when the animals come by and eat the snacks, that I'm actually feeding my imaginary friend, and that by doing so my imaginary friend will bring me good fortune, I'm probably going to continue doing that. That is that God manifesting in real life, because I believed in that being, and that being wants me to do this. I'm doing that in the material world. I have thus made that thing real, because now it is having a real effect on the real world through my belief. And if I convince one of my real friends that this imaginary friend exists, as much as they believe I exist, then there's a good chance that person is also going to start leaving snacks out. And what if that happens on the scale of a community or a nation even? Now you've created now you've probably altered the ecosystem greatly, because you're now feeding the species around you things that they were not used to eating before, which may have a positive effect or a negative effect, but that's going to have chain reactions in the real world that's going to affect the real world, and that is the effect of the God that you believed in, the imaginary friend you believed in. Even though they're not actually there, that's a material effect that happened just because you believed in something. And that's the other world. That's magic. And that's what the gods are. And then you can use this filter, use this lens to apply things to, like, say, the Abrahamic God. We'll get into that later, because that's a whole other thing. But you can use this lens to say, well, if that's the case, then what is the Abrahamic God trying to achieve? What is its goal? God's plan, so to speak. You can use this kind of framework to understand any god. They're not beyond your knowing. They're within your knowing. And people who tell you that just are intellectually atrophied. They haven't been flexing the muscle they need in order to question these things and analyze them. But that'll be another video. Talk to you later, if I can drag out.